Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, ancient texts, modern research, you name it, and we really try to distill them into something powerful, something you can actually use. And our mission today is, well, it's a big one. It's about navigating fear and finding a genuine sort of rock-solid confidence.
Right.
We've collected some really powerful reflective material, all designed to help you find peace when everything around you just feels like a storm.
And what we have here is, it's a fascinating structure, really. We're pulling from the Gospel of Mark, the first letter of John, and a few Psalms.
Okay.
And they all point to this one universal human experience, this tension between our own confusion and fear and the reality of a stabilizing, loving presence that's, right there.
So this isn't just some academic exercise. It's more like a blueprint. We're unpacking how deep trust, this idea of radical love and clear understanding, can actually help you overcome the storms of life. And we start with what you could call the ultimate invitation, the ideal state. It really sets the tone for everything else.
And that invitation is beautifully concise. It's from Psalm 46.10. Be still and know that I am God. I mean, that one line just captures it all. It's the prerequisite. You have to surrender that urge to control the chaos, to stop the frantic internal noise. Just be still before you can really know what stability is.
That is the ideal, absolutely. But let's be honest, being still is probably the hardest thing to do when the water's rushing into the boat, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So we go straight from that ideal into a story where it's completely shattered. The crisis in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6. This is where we see what happens when stillness just fails.
This passage is just pivotal. It gives us a psychological snapshot of, high-stress human behavior. So Jesus had just miraculously fed the 5,000.
Right.
But immediately after, he basically forces the disciples into the boat, tells them to row across toward Bethsaida while he goes off to a mountain to pray, alone.
So he sends them into the storm before he takes his break. And they're out there on their own.
Exactly. And when evening comes, they're way out at sea, and they are struggling. I mean, the wind is against them. They are, and the text says this, tossed about while rowing, just pulling on those oars with everything they have.
And the timing is so important here. It tells you everything about their state of mind. This wasn't a quick storm.
No, not at all. The text specifies it was about the 4th watch of the night.
And for anyone who, doesn't keep up with ancient timekeeping, the 4th watch is between 3 and 6 in the morning.
It's the absolute lowest point for human resilience, for energy, for making good decisions. They are just utterly exhausted, demoralized, and physically spent.
And it's in that state.
In that state, Jesus finally comes toward them, walking on the sea, and the text says he meant to pass by them.
But their reaction?
It's pure panic, fueled by exhaustion. They saw him, and they didn't see their teacher. They didn't see their savior. They saw a ghost.
Wow.
And they cried out because they were just completely terrified.
This is the part that I find so compelling. I mean, how often in life, when we're at our most anxious, do we interpret the very thing meant to help us as just another threat?
Exactly.
They couldn't recognize salvation because their anxiety had made them blind.
And that's the moment Jesus breaks through it all. He doesn't wait for them to figure it out. He speaks at once and commands their internal state. He says, take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid.
And the effect is immediate.
Instantaneous. He gets into the boat. The wind dies down. His presence and that explicit reassurance, it just extinguishes the external crisis. But, and this is critical, the story doesn't end there.
Right. It immediately moves to analyzing the real failure.
Right. Which brings us to this core issue. The hardened heart, this cognitive blindness. Despite the storm stopping, the text says they were completely astounded.
Not just amazed, baffled.
Utterly baffled. And you have to ask, why?
And the source material is just brutally honest about it. The reason for their panic, for their astonishment, it wasn't the wind. It wasn't even the walking on water.
No.
It was because, and I'm quoting here, they had not understood the incident of the loaves. On the contrary, their hearts were hardened.
And this is where we get that profound psychological takeaway. Their inability to grasp the simple, abundant provision of the loaves, a miracle that happened just hours earlier, is directly linked to their inability to recognize their Savior on the water. They failed to connect the dots. They didn't integrate the last lesson.
Okay, but hang on. Isn't it a little, patronizing to tell someone who's fighting for their life against a headwind that their heart is hardened? What if they were just exhausted? How do the sources separate that from a real spiritual blockage?
That's a really essential question. And the hardening here, I think, it isn't necessarily a moral failure. It's a failure of memory. It's a failure of integration that's caused by that acute stress.
I see.
When you're operating in that fourth watch, state exhausted, afraid, confused, your brain just defaults to panic.
Yeah.
It loses access to the memory of past reliability. It loses its ability to see the pattern.
So the deep dive insight here is that fear, confusion, exhaustion, they literally create a kind of cognitive blindness.
Yes.
And if you fail to remember and integrate the small victories, the times you were provided for in the past, your heart hardens to the possibility of future help. Your default setting just becomes terror.
Precisely. Even when salvation is right there, they were relying on their own rowing, their own strength, instead of recognizing the pattern of provision that Jesus had just established.
So the crisis isn't just the wind. It's the internal state that blocks you from even seeing the help.
That's it. Jesus is inviting us to trust him, not just when the storm starts, but based on the memory of what he's already done.
Okay, so if the crisis in the boat was the symptom and the hardened heart was the diagnosis, what's the cure? This is where our sources pivot pretty dramatically, right? From a physical storm to the inner workings of the heart.
We move to 1 John chapter 4, and this is the theological antidote. This passage is so direct, it establishes the foundational premise: God is love.
Simple as that.
And the immediate consequence of that is whoever remains in love remains in God and God in him.
The definition and the instruction are all tied up together. So if we accept that reality, the practical implication for us is clear. It says, "Beloved, if God so loved us, we also must love one another."
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just a nice suggestion for getting along. It's the actual mechanism by which that divine presence remains in us and is brought to perfection in us.
Yes, the text explains that this active mutual love is the proof. It's how we know we remain in him and he in us. It's a reciprocal relationship built on the confidence of just belonging.
Which brings us to the phrase that everyone knows, the central insight, the clear answer to fear. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear.
That's the word.
It's like a spiritual law of physics. But we need to dig into why it works. What is the fear that's being driven out exactly?
Well, the text immediately gives us the mechanism. It says, fear has to do with punishment, and so one who fears is not yet perfect in love. Now, we have to think about punishment not just in some, ancient judicial sense,
Right.
but in the modern psychological sense, that pervasive low-grade anxiety about consequences.
The fear of being exposed, maybe. The fear of rejection, of failure.
Yeah.
Fear that your worth is conditional and that someone can just revoke it. I mean, that's the modern anxiety epidemic right there.
Absolutely. When we're driven by that kind of transactional anxiety, the fear that if we don't perform perfectly, we'll be judged or rejected, we are living outside of perfect love.
Right.
Perfect love, which is really confident self-acceptance and confident belonging, it just negates that core worry. If you know you are loved unconditionally, the fear of judgment, which is the root of almost all fear, it just loses its power.
So that a remedy for the hardened heart, the
Right.
antidote to that paralyzing anxiety they felt in the boat, it isn't just try harder.
Yeah.
It's moving into a space of secure, unconditional belonging. And that leads to confidence.
Yeah.
The text calls it having confidence on the day of judgment, which I take it means you can act with boldness right now because you're not worried about the final grade.
Exactly. You're moving from a fearful, tentative relationship defined by what if I mess up to a bold confidence defined by I already belong.
That is a monumental transition.
Yeah.
We started with this individual crisis in a tiny boat, moved to the internal spiritual solution, this mechanism of perfect love, and now we need to broaden this out. What does this look like when it's applied not just to one person's heart, but to the entire world?
This is where we turn to Psalm 72.
Okay.
And this is where the vision just explodes into universal justice and equity. It establishes the massive implications of this kind of divine rule. The psalm focuses on the ideal ruler, the king's son, who is endowed with judgment and justice. This isn't just about personal salvation anymore.
It's about public systemic rescue.
Systemic rescue, that's a great way to put it.
So how is that justice defined in the text? What are the actual outcomes?
Well, the outcomes are specifically targeted at the most vulnerable. It says he'll govern people with justice and the afflicted with judgment. And crucially, he shall rescue the poor when he cries out and the afflicted when he has no one to help him. He shall have pity for the lowly and the poor. The lives of the poor he shall save. This is the concrete result of a rule that's founded on perfect love, a radical commitment to rescue those who are suffering.
It grounds that abstract idea of love in really tangible acts of rescue and aid. But the text makes it clear this isn't, just for one area. It mentions the kings of Tarshish and the Isles. What's the concept there? Is it just about old geography?
No, it's about universality. Tarshish was often the reference for the extreme west, the edge of the known world. The Isles meant remote coastlands. The message is that the reach of this justice is completely non-exclusive. It covers every single corner of the map.
And the response in the psalm emphasizes that.
It does. It says, Lord, every nation on earth will adore you.
That's the ultimate statement of universal reach. Wow. So we move from the terrifying specificity of a small boat in the middle of the night through the theological antidote of perfect love that repairs the heart, all the way to a universal promise of justice and rescue for every nation on earth.
That's the profound trajectory of these sources. The crisis is localized, but the solution is global. It's infinite.
And the Alleluia verse you pulled, that sort of seals the deal on this idea.
It does. It's from 1 Timothy, and it highlights Christ as the one proclaimed to the Gentiles and believed in throughout the world. It shifts the emphasis from a historical event on the Sea of Galilee to a universal truth that applies to every single person facing a storm, regardless of where they are.
So if we pull this all together, what we've really uncovered here is a clear sort of three-part pathway out of that internal chaos.
I think so.
When the wind is against you, when you feel totally out at sea, the invitation is first to break that cognitive blindness, to choose to recognize the nearness of help. It's there. It's just waiting for your attention.
Right. And second, to allow perfect love, not paralyzing fear, to define your reality.
Because if fear hardens the heart and blocks you from remembering past help,
then love perfects the heart and gives you the confidence to stand up straight in the present, no matter what the storm is doing. It reminds you that rescue and justice are promised, and they're universal.
And finally, that brings us to the application. I mean, this deep dive has laid out the knowledge, but these sources, they demand action. So the final provocative thought, the application of everything we've talked about, is really a question aimed directly at you, the listener. The texts invite you to consider this. What specific fear or worry do you need to surrender today so that you can trust more deeply in the storms of your life?
And that moment of active surrender, that's the very definition of being still.